James Parker stood at the entrance of the upscale restaurant, feeling distinctly out of place in his jeans and gray t-shirt. At 32, he worked as a mechanic and lived a simple life that rarely included establishments with tablecloths and candles. His friend Marcus had set up this blind date, insisting that James needed to get back into the dating world after his divorce 2 years ago. James had agreed reluctantly, and now he was regretting that decision as he looked at the elegant diners around him. The hostess had told him his table was ready, and she gestured vaguely toward the back of the restaurant before rushing off to handle another customer. James walked in the direction she had indicated, looking for table 12 where he was supposed to meet his date. He spotted what he thought was the right table and sat down, noticing a glass of wine already waiting. He assumed his date had arrived early, though he did not see anyone nearby at the moment. A few minutes later, a young woman in a light blue dress approached in a wheelchair, and James stood automatically out of politeness. She looked surprised to see him but smiled warmly and asked if he was waiting for someone. James explained he was supposed to be meeting a blind date at table 12, and the woman laughed softly and said this was actually table 21. James felt his face grow warm with embarrassment as he realized his mistake. The woman introduced herself as Sophie Mitchell and said she was also waiting for a blind date who apparently had not shown up yet. James apologized profusely for sitting at her table and started to gather his things to leave, but Sophie stopped him and suggested he might as well stay since they were both waiting for dates who seemed to be running late. James hesitated but found himself sitting back down. Charmed by her easy manner and genuine smile, they ordered drinks and began talking, and James found himself immediately comfortable with Sophie in a way he had not expected. She asked about his work, and he explained he was a mechanic who specialized in restoring vintage cars. Sophie's eyes lit up with genuine interest, and she told him her grandfather had collected classic cars when she was young. James found her enthusiasm refreshing compared to the usual reactions he got when he mentioned his blue-collar profession. Sophie told him she worked as a graphic designer and ran her own small business from home. She mentioned casually that she had been in a car accident 3 years ago that had left her unable to walk, but she spoke about it matter-of-factly without seeking pity. James appreciated her directness and found himself admiring her strength. As they continued talking, James realized he was having a better time than he had experienced on any date in recent memory. After an hour passed, it became clear that neither of their intended dates was going to show up. Sophie laughed and said maybe the universe had done them both a favor. James agreed wholeheartedly because he could not imagine wanting to leave this conversation to meet whoever he was originally supposed to see. Sophie suggested they might as well order dinner since they were already there, and James said he would like that very much. Over dinner, they discovered they had similar senses of humor and shared interests in old movies and local history. Sophie told stories about growing up as the daughter of a successful businessman who had initially struggled to accept her independence after the accident. James shared about his own journey rebuilding his life after his divorce and learning to trust again. The conversation flowed naturally, and James found himself laughing more than he had in months. As the evening drew to a close, James asked if he could see Sophie again, and she gave him her number without hesitation. She mentioned she usually did not connect this easily with people, and James admitted he felt the same way. They agreed to meet for coffee later that week, and James walked Sophie to her car, where she had adaptive controls that allowed her to drive independently. James was impressed by her self-sufficiency and told her so, which made her smile. Their coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into regular weekend outings. James learned that Sophie had worked hard to maintain her independence after her accident, and she never wanted to be seen as someone who needed saving. James made sure to respect that boundary while still showing he cared. He appreciated her strength and the way she approached life with determination and humor, despite the challenges she faced. 2 months into their relationship, James met Sophie's father, Richard Mitchell, who was indeed a successful CEO, as Sophie had mentioned. Richard was initially skeptical of James, clearly protective of his daughter and concerned about her dating a mechanic. However, during dinner, James spoke passionately about his work and his goals, and Richard began to see that James valued Sophie for who she was. rather than being intimidated or overly solicitous about her disability. Sophie later told James that her father had called her the next day to say he approved, which was significant because Richard had disapproved of most people Sophie dated. James felt honored by this acceptance, though he cared more about Sophie's opinion than her father's. Sophie assured him that her opinion was very positive indeed, and their relationship continued to deepen. 6 months after their accidental first meeting, James took Sophie back to the same restaurant where they had met. He had called ahead to reserve table 21 specifically, the wrong table that had turned out to be exactly right. During dessert, James told Sophie that sitting at the wrong table had been the best mistake of his life. He pulled out a ring and asked if she would consider making their accidental meeting permanent. Sophie said yes through tears of joy, and the restaurant staff, who had been let in on the plan, brought out champagne to celebrate. Sophie later joked that she should send a thank you note to her blind date for standing her up because it had led her to exactly the right person. James agreed that sometimes the universe worked in mysterious but perfect ways. They married a year later in a ceremony that celebrated their journey together. Richard walked Sophie down the aisle, and James's friend Marcus stood as his best man, still taking credit for the whole thing, despite James pointing out that Marcus had actually set him up with someone completely different. During their reception, James gave a toast about how the wrong table had led him to the right person, and how he had learned that the best things in life often came from unexpected detours. Sophie added that she had learned to trust that things worked out the way they were supposed to, even when plans fell apart. She said that being stood up on a blind date had felt disappointing at first, but it had opened the door for something far better than she could have imagined. Their story became a favorite among their friends and family, a reminder that sometimes wrong turns led to exactly where you needed to be. Years later, they would return to that restaurant on their anniversary and always request table 21. The staff came to know them and their story, and they would sometimes comp dessert in honor of the couple who had found each other by accident. James and Sophie would sit across from each other, still finding new things to talk about and laugh over, still grateful for the mix-up that had brought them together. Their relationship proved that love did not require perfect circumstances or flawless first impressions. It simply required two people willing to take a chance on an unexpected connection. James had walked into that restaurant expecting nothing special, and he had found everything he had been searching for. Sophie had been prepared for disappointment, and instead she had discovered joy. Sometimes the universe conspired to put people exactly where they needed to be, even if it meant sitting at the wrong table. James and Sophie were living proof that the best love stories often began with happy accidents, and that being open to unexpected possibilities could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Their wrong table had become the foundation of their right life together. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love. Leave a comment about a time when a mistake led you to something wonderful.